My name is Larry Bates. I will be defending my dissertation on the topic of a qualitative exploratory study of private sector decision-maker perceptions of cybersecurity design strategy. The dissertation is presented in the Doctor of Computer Science and Cybersecurity and Information Assurance program, and I will begin. The exploratory qualitative study aimed to investigate private sector decision-maker perceptions of cybersecurity design strategy and the origination of the perceptions using blockchain technology as a frame of reference. Since data breaches and security incidents are objective, the subjective views of decision-makers currently in the field could potentially inform the understanding of what theories or strategies get employed in the real-world settings, why, and what combination of circumstances create best outcomes. Further, it is helpful to articulate that decision-makers within an organization can be developers, while developers may not necessarily be decision-makers. For this study, the developers are defined as the engineers and strategists that develop, execute, and iterate applications or organizational infrastructure. Decision-makers will be defined as individuals with the final say on the implementation or execution of a project within an organization. A growing body of research suggests that decision-makers within an organization in the private sector tend to undervalue security in the cyber infrastructure design process. This perception of cybersecurity's lack of importance is reflected by an average of 3 to 5% of corporate budgets being dedicated to cybersecurity. This study was an opportunity to learn about decision-makers' perceptions of cybersecurity in order to understand if the statistics reflected in the literature review were accurate or congruous with the actual perceptions that would be reported by decision makers in the study. In principle, it's impossible to determine the exact origin of an idea to know how it evolves into real-world impact. Due to the abstract nature of discovering ideas, using blockchain technology as a tangible widget will be a means of grounding the study in the framework. The sphere of influence framework attempts to identify strategies and methods of approaching cybersecurity strategy development, track a concept during a development lifecycle to understand that there are multiple spheres of influence through which the idea or concept had to flow to get to the final stage of manifestation into a product, service, or application of an abstract concept into a real-world setting. This study was attempting to understand which spheres of influence informed decision-makers and the perceptions of how new technologies emerge and the usefulness of those technologies within the context of their organizations. The research questions were framed around these attempts to understand decision makers' perspectives, and the first question is, how do private sector decision makers perceive strategies for implementing cybersecurity measures stemming from academic literature in organizations that are heavily reliant upon digital infrastructure? Question 2, how do private sector decision makers develop strategies in cybersecurity implementation? This is the presentation of the visual representation of the spheres of influence framework, from which the research aims to establish an approach to development life cycles that reflects balancing academic theory with real-world limitations on development. The larger goal is to have qualitative insights from decision makers on their experiences implementing new cybersecurity strategies and understanding the origins and execution of strategies within their respective organizations. In other words, if cybersecurity is implemented within an organization, from where are the ideas and theories affecting the implementations originating? The study was a qualitative exploratory study. The questionnaire was presented in a narrative format, which allowed the participants to answer the questions without sacrificing their specialized knowledge within their respective fields, in that the study was trying to use decision making as a general litmus that would work across different types of organizations, with the understanding that cybersecurity in decision making, or the strategizing of cybersecurity around decision making, would be the common traits that would bind the participants across different types of organizations. This was in the context of the research around cybersecurity professionals showing that there were roughly 4.19 million globally, so the sample size was not expected to be large relative to the demographic available. And in that context, the original goal was to get 200 participants, but it was only able to secure 7 participants in the time allotted. So it reflects that decision makers are in high demand and their time is very rare, and this is one of the issues concerning getting the data for this study, in that decision makers were not readily available or necessarily willing to participate, but this is also potentially one of the reasons that there was not a lot of data on the subject previously available. The instrumentation used a Google form with open-ended questions. The dependability of the study comes from the fact that decision makers have specialized insight into the operations of organizations, and in that context, the responses of decision makers are going to be much more valuable than simply getting responses of anyone working within an organizational context. The sample size was limited to decision makers to ensure that the data was in line with the understanding of higher level cybersecurity strategies, rather than trying to extrapolate the application of strategy through responses from non-specialists, which is the impetus of focusing on decision makers and higher level specialists as the respondents. This is a pilot study which followed IRB standards, and in the process, the identities of the participants were decoupled from the data, and the data is being held in RSA encrypted storage and will be destroyed after the allotted time period. And participants were paid $15 for filling out the questionnaire and were debriefed about the goal of the study. The questionnaire responses were open coded initially, are automatically coded, and using Qt software. In the process, the open coding produced a word cloud from which the researcher, or from which I extrapolated the more specific themes through axial coding, and in that context used theoretical coding to extrapolate from the short answer questions how the responses fit into the themes to align the data so that it represented the different categories of how the respondents were focusing the importance of their responses. The respondents or the participants were sought through email lists, through social media posts, forums, and message boards, and it was framed as looking for cybersecurity specialists or who were also decision makers, and as that was not initially producing enough respondents, it was eventually just shortened to purely decision makers within the context of an organization that had a cybersecurity infrastructure. So the decision maker did not necessarily have to be a cybersecurity professional towards the end of the study, in that the cybersecurity professional restriction seemed to limit the respondents too much. This is the word cloud that was produced from the automatic open coding, in addition to the themes that emerged from the axial coding. As you can see, the word cloud has a range of terms and frameworks in which these concepts apply to different aspects of organizational infrastructure, such as cybersecurity, best practice, gap and security breach, application of cybersecurity. So the different codes that emerged were analyzed to understand at a higher level if there were common themes or traits amongst these responses, and that is what informed the short-term versus long-term active threat management, real-world application, and legal implications as the themed categories which capture the codes that were returned in the open coding segment. Within the findings, it was shown that many of the responses indicated the necessity of regular meetings to develop strategy, often referencing a quarterly schedule. Legal implications were regularly referenced, especially in the context of using strategy meetings to discuss legal implications of practices within the organization or potential legal ramifications of any new strategies or technologies that will be implemented. It was indicated that the respondents tended to bake cybersecurity strategies into the beginning of development cycles rather than wait until development had initiated or had been working for a few quarters before implementing cybersecurity. So this is one of those cybersecurity specific strategy responses. And then the real world demands within an organization. The respondents indicated that the real world demands are oftentimes the deciding factor in terms of making decisions, and although theoretical concepts can be intriguing or potentially novel, the real world limitations are going to be what actually influences their decision making more than the potential of the theory. And then cybersecurity seemed to be organization specific, but there were some things that were seen across multiple organizations, such as quarterly meetings, open lines of communication and frequent communication, as well as frequent check-ins with the development application concerning the people who were applying the technology or the build, ensuring that they were informing the decision maker of their progress frequently so that there was bottom-up communication in a regularly scheduled occurrence. One of the biggest limitations to this study was the low number of participants, which severely limits the transferability of the results. In that context, that the participants were decision makers and not lay people or even low-level specialists makes a significant difference in terms of the relevance of the results, but the low number of participants still severely limits the transferability. The analysis of gaps in literature focused on Charlotte Ducouing's framing of the need for metatrust and blockchain technology, as in the law's capacity to protect that technology under the premise that blockchain technology has not yet achieved enough legal protection to attain enough metatrust to gain mainstream adoption. The results of the study would suggest that Ducouing was right in the assertion that the metatrust that could be established in the form of legal clarity around blockchain is not currently present, and by proxy a lack of legal clarity is specifically a source of a lack of metatrust in blockchain technology. As respondents indicated a willingness to test blockchain technology while preserving enough of a sandbox environment to prevent danger to users, a lack of metatrust would not indicate complete avoidance of the new technologies, instead would imply hesitation to risk harm to users or to reputation of the organization. While these responses are in line with Ducouing's framework of metatrust, the limitations of this study would warrant a need for many more participants before any themes that emerge could be validated as being common among decision makers across different types of organizations. In the context of the research questions, the data would indicate that while a new technology like blockchain may emerge and present itself with many theoretical applications, the decision makers that are tasked with implementing new technologies or concepts are more concerned with keeping operations smooth and preventing unnecessary legal risks rather than rushing to test new and novel widgets. The data indicates that decision makers would not be quick to implement a new or untested concept or technology. Additionally, it indicates that the concern for real-world application of technology and how it would affect short and long-term operations would usurp the risks that comes with implementing a novel but untested concept or technology. Cybersecurity strategies can often be opaque due to the nature of any given organization not wanting to reveal the inner workings of how they secure their perimeters, both digital and physical. When a new technology emerges with the premise of being able to cut costs for securing digital data while increasing the security of said data, the promise of the technology may be enough for some organizations to implement without testing. After executing this study, I would not anticipate many decision makers to implement a new technology without some data validating the technology, or that the decision-making process would demand some sort of controlled experiment as not to cause legal risk to the organization looking to implement the technology. The perceived gap in cybersecurity preparedness can depend upon the perceived level of the threat. It will be important to ensure that decision makers that participate in future studies are working in organizations that are willing to share their data on breaches or have already made their breaches public. Additionally, it may be useful to pick a single industry in which to execute a case study to get an understanding of a specific industry's decision-making process. Considering the difficulty of gathering participants, it may be beneficial to execute these types of studies at conventions or in situations which large concentrations of decision makers from different organizations will be present. A mixed method study may be warranted that looks at quantitative data concerning the adoption rates of blockchain technology in organizations relative to the legal frameworks that exist within the national jurisdiction adjudicating a given organization. Additionally, continuing to use blockchain technology as a tangible widget from which to assess the rate of technology adoption may be useful in finding both contextually specific and transferable strategies that will inform more practical approaches to emerging technologies and concepts while leaving room for innovation to improve the cyber